Can we get a consumer agent in the pocket of every individual out there? And look, as a VC, I'm obviously looking into the future 5, 8, 10 years. And this is...
That was Phylicia Koh on Agentic advertising. Nobody told her what the spec said. She got there anyway. This is the ADOTAT Show. I'm Pesach Latin.
Welcome to the ADOTAT Show. My guest today is Phylicia Koh, General Partner at Play Ventures, the gaming and consumer VC fund. Phylicia says that privacy is a lie. The industry tells itself to feel better about a trade that everyone else has already made. She also says Anthropic claiming that they will never run ads on Claude is either self-deception or just plain deception. She brought Donald Trump and J.D. Vance to her desert island because, I quote, "That way I know the U.S. military is coming to find us." And she has the most detailed technical vision of agent-to-agent advertising I have heard from anyone, including the ad tech founders. Phylicia, welcome. First of all, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
So walk me through the agent-to-agent ad transaction that you have described. 3 agents, a brand agent bidding for a banner slot, a publisher agent controlling inventory, and a consumer agent enforcing the player's preferences. They negotiate in milliseconds. The player sees an ad she actually wants. Explain, though, how this is different from what programmatic already does, because it sounds a lot like RTB, just with some extra steps.
I think that's a fair analogy. I think the crux of this vision of how it might work in the future starts with, can we get a consumer agent in the pocket of every individual out there? And look, as a VC, I'm obviously looking into the future 5, 8, 10 years. And this is still, I guess, a little bit like building castles in the sky kind of a vision here. But I think that future would bring about a new paradigm in advertising to an ecosystem where, honestly, it's not delivering value to either the consumer or to the advertiser at the moment. It's a broken system. There's a lot of value extracted out of there. In an ideal world, you have a consumer agent in your pocket. Think about it as a personal assistant for everybody. They sit across all the different ecosystems, all the different walled gardens. It looks at your calendar, it looks at your inbox, it knows what you buy, it knows, what slots you like to book for your High Rocks training sessions or your Pilates or your yoga and whatever it is. So it has a lot of first party preference and behavioral data that right now just doesn't really exist anywhere, at least not with your consent. And the idea basically would be that, I suppose, in that scenario, your DSPs and your SSPs, their presence starts to become a little bit more questionable. Their purpose starts to become a little bit questionable. If you have a consumer agent that can negotiate and screen on your behalf, negotiating real time with a publisher or an advertiser agent, that will be the future. My hope is, or my dream perhaps, is that this will result in advertising that's more valuable for everybody, advertising that's more valuable for the end user. Because I think advertising right now has essentially an image issue with the end consumer. It has an image issue also with the money, the VCs, right? Most VCs are deathly afraid of paid performance marketing. You say that you grow your business primarily through or with a large proportion of traffic and customers being driven by paid advertising. You get a huge negative response. And I think that is valid. And I understand why those investors have that response. But I also think that's a bit naive to think that everybody is going to go organic and viral and that is a strategy. I think advertising, when done right, is a core part of that growth engine for any game or any consumer apps.
Sure, Brent.
If last touch attribution worked, your waiter would get full credit for the meal. We make sure the chef gets credit too. Incremental.
When I listened to one of your interviews, you said the consumer agent is largely unbuilt and no incumbent owns it. That sounds a bit like a pitch for a portfolio company. Are you looking to fund someone that's building this?
I would love to. I'm going to be honest. I haven't found anybody. I think if I'm in San Francisco right now, there are AI billboards every 5 blocks. And I think most people are building.
Your reality is also blending into our...
Yeah.
Slowly.
Yeah, you can see I'm in a hotel room right now, so the bed is blending in. I tried my best to look like a presentable VC today, but technology failed me. Yeah, but most companies today are building AI agents for small, medium businesses, for enterprises. And I get it. I understand why that's why they do it. I think that's actually not where the money is. I don't think that's where the scale is. I think it's going to the end user and building that for them. Now, that is a much more difficult equation to do. And I think that's also something where, there is a huge, let's just say China versus the rest of the world divide. China has its own ecosystem. It has a super app that everybody uses, WeChat, Tencent. So, and they're extremely, I think, AI forward in how they're thinking about adoption and driving adoption. Tencent did these kind of road shows literally where you come, the appeal to the public was come, we'll give you a buffet. You'll have lobsters and you'll have shrimp and you'll have all the nice things. Come and sit down and an engineer will help you get an agent on your phone. Like that's this crazy brute forcing of adoption, but it is interesting to observe how they're going about it. And I think if consumer agents become par for the course for everybody in China, like what is the value that, these agents are in theory delivering to the end user? I think how it ends up being adopted in China is going to be extremely different to the rest of the world. Obviously, we have a much more fragmented ecosystem. There isn't a one app to rule them all. I think OpenAI is trying to be that. And they're making kind of interesting moves on that front as well.
You also said that ad tech founders should be building brand side intent tools, middleware that lets brands express campaign goals in a form that an agent can negotiate on rather than feeding creatives into Advantage Plus or Axon or hoping for the best. Is that a direct shot at Meta and Google's AI optimization? Are you saying their black box optimizers are perhaps the wrong model?
Look, I think what we want to do is have more transparent, I guess, advertising options, right? So I think, like, for example, I'm looking at it from the perspective of mobile game developers and consumer app makers. And right now we're frequently at the mercy of algo changes on the Meta side. I think there was one happening in February or March. And if you ask most of the mobile games and consumer apps founders, Q1 was horrible. No idea why. No real alternative. Don't really know what happened, what was the change, how to combat that. And so I think everybody in general is looking for a way to better do user acquisition in a way that they can track, understand, have more value from. And I think more options from that point of view is always going to be welcome from the game and app makers.
So what happens to media agency when brands have an agent negotiate on their behalf? Does the agent replace the entire agency?
I think it will end up threatening that. I think agencies are going to have to find a different way to add value. Look, the landscape is huge. Most game makers, most game publishers, most app makers and app publishers don't currently use an agency in a large way. If they do, it's to do a percentage of the traffic, try to pit them against each other, complement what the internal efforts are. I think there will always be demand from larger enterprise clients for agencies. And part of that is not because they couldn't do it themselves, but it's just that they rather abstract the responsibility to somebody else. I think if you're an agency, if you can't beat them, join them. And I would be thinking a lot about how can you adopt those agent harnessing for yourself, right? Can you build a buy-side agent for yourself to service all your clients? You'll probably still have demand from enterprise clients. I don't think the reason why enterprise clients use an agency is purely just because of the hard skill capability.
Is your vision different?
I think it's very similar. I think what's missing from that equation, which the part that I'm super excited about, is where is the consumer represented in that equation? And the vision I see is that if you can get a consumer agent in everybody's pocket, that's going to be their representation. That's going to be who's also influencing the control of data and permission. And so I think part of what he's pitching with SCP is part of that equation where the buyer and seller agents can, communicate with each other, provide parameters to each other, and ultimately, hopefully decide to transact with each other. But I think that part still has the missing part, which is who's representing the consumer. How do I control my data? How do I set my preferences as a consumer so that I get more valuable ads out of it? I think in that AdCP paradigm that he's painting, it's still very much, the same kind of parties that are transacting with each other. So the likelihood is probably, I will continue to get ads. I'm still playing by the rules that somebody else set in the playground. As a consumer, I'm still probably going to get crappy ads. I think that's advertising's issue, where it essentially is giving people the ick. And, I'll give an example here. I have two nephews. They're now 10 and 8. But since the age of 3 and 4, they've known what advertising is. And advertising to them is just a horrible experience. It's the thing that pops up that disrupts my game. It's that stupid thing that blocks my vid. Like I'm watching YouTube and then, suddenly I see this stupid ad. And it's like a groan. It's like, ugh. But that is an entire generation of new consumers, Gen Alpha, that's coming up for whom advertising is synonymous with poor value. And I think in that SCP kind of scenario that's painted, the only people who benefit still are the buyers and sellers, but not necessarily the end consumer. So I don't know what happens when, the end consumer still sees the ad as a crappy value for them. Are you actually going to get revenue and return on ad spend for your dollars? I'm not sure.
Right. So you also attack the whole privacy industry. We act as if data privacy is sacred, universal value, but our behavior proves it's actually a commodity we're happy to trade. That's what you said. You said if privacy were truly sacrosanct, Meta and TikTok would not exist. When the US threatened to ban TikTok, users went to Red Note, another Chinese app. Phylicia, you are calling the entire privacy movement performative. Can you defend that?
I think that, look, I'm just reading what the behavior is saying. I think that people don't value privacy in itself.
Is this Western hypocrisy specifically? You grew up in Singapore, and you've also mentioned in your interviews that Asia has a completely different relationship with privacy.
Yeah, I think it's a spectrum. Privacy as valuable and sacrosanct in itself, I think, sits on a spectrum. I think the West is on kind of one end of it, right?
Right.
I think Singapore sits somewhere in the middle where we say we have a social contract and we say, look, I give up some rights, right? I give up some rights to freedom of rights. I give up certain things in exchange for a good life. That is the social contract. And then you have the other extreme ends, which is probably many of the other Asian countries, including China, where giving up your right to privacy is so normalized, it just becomes accepted. And I think it sits on a spectrum. Personally, I value privacy, but I do understand where the kind of different societies are coming from. And I think if you look at even what happens in the UK, right, I think they wanted to implement a digital ID system. And, in principle, that was probably something like 80% of the polling supported that until the implementation actually rolled out, and then it kind of dropped to 68%. And I think that's because of the friction and the what you're giving up and the value you're going to get becomes real. I think the problem is when privacy brings no value. Basically,
right.
I think that's the issue, and I think that's the part that's broken or not working as well as it should be with current advertising. I'll give you an example of kind of how it's different, right? In China, for example, I was there in January. They have a social ID system. I was on a flight. I was horrified. There was an actor on the flight. His fans somehow knew what airport he was going to be on, what gate he was going to be on, what flight he was on. They bought tickets on the flight. They were rushing him on the plane. I thought that was crazy. And I turned to somebody and they explained to me, no, this is very normal. Your data is brokered. If you're a celebrity, your flight, your travel pattern is probably being sold by somebody at the airlines to the fandom. It's very normal. And that for me was even coming from Singapore was this is crazy. This makes me extremely uncomfortable.
So you also said that Anthropic is lying when they said they'll never run advertising. You say it's a lie they either tell themselves or a lie they tell others. You're calling and basically saying that they'll have to. You quoted Charlie Munger. Show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. What is Anthropic's incentive? They raise billions and they need revenue. Is advertising the inevitable revenue model?
Look, I think for right now, I believe that they believe that they won't do advertising, right? And their focus is on enterprise clients. And right now, I think they're doing a fantastic job and all of that. But ultimately, you also do have a long tail of consumer users that is using Claude, that is using Anthropic products, that is giving them lots of data. I think eventually what happens when enterprise revenue starts to decline, if it declines, or, let's say they get listed, things are not going great. Advertising, I think, is a very normal, in a way, natural conclusion of a monetization model to add in order to get some revenue from your free users. I don't think that's, again, I think people like to paint the picture of introducing advertising as bad. I don't think, or at monetization is bad. I don't think that's necessarily the case. Again, it is the case when you just get really crappy ads showed up in your chats when there's no, boundaries kind of being respected, right? But I do think it's inevitable. I think Netflix was the same. Netflix for a long time had just the premium product, and then eventually they did add in advertising and their language changed. So I do think that that's something that they will inevitably start to consider. So when they say, we're not going to add ads I think you're not going to add ads for right now, or maybe in the next year or two.
So let's talk a little bit about playable apps. You said that gaming is the OS for user engagement and monetization, and that consumer in-app spending exceeded gaming in-app spending for the first time in 2025. Walk me through what a playable app is with examples, because gamification has been a buzzword for a decade or so. What makes
Yes.
your version different?
Yeah, so I think you're right. And that's also probably why we hate to use the word gamification, because
Right.
it has so much connotations of like, let's do a leaderboard. Oh, Duolingo put streaks. Let me put streaks in there. And that is part, I think, of what playable apps can have. To us, playable apps and gamified apps is much more. I think there's a whole stack of interconnected disciplines that most people don't appreciate. And it starts from user acquisition to the core loop and the meta systems, the streaks and things that you talk about, leaderboards and so on, all the way down to like monetization and economy design, all the way down to live operations. And it's kind of that top and tail ends that are more often not talked about, because those are really, really hard to do. Those don't sound as interesting to the average person on the street.
Right. Well, this sounds interesting. You gamified prayer. Is nothing sacred?
Well, look, I think it's about using game
Prayer
design.
boosting, world prayer, streaks, login bonuses, live prayers. I mean, you literally made TikTok for prayer.
Well, look, I think it's about using game design to basically help foster habits, whatever your habits you want to do. Like whether it's prayer because that's important to you, whether it's investing.
Yeah, and
Whether
you
it's your
did,
mental
and there
health.
you did couple intimacy and relationship wellness. You gamified marriage. That's either genius or maybe a plot for Black Mirror. Which is it?
I don't think it's as nefarious as a plot for Black Mirror. I like to think of it like anything that is in the spectrum of wellness, helping you to live a better life, and if it's intimacy and couples, marriages and relationship wellness, that's great. If it's helping you to invest and close the wealth gap, that's great. If it's helping you to do the things that you want to do for your faith habits, I think that's great as well. And so I think that's about applying kind of all these game design techniques to different spaces. And I think there's a huge opportunity there. That's the truth of it.
Right. You also mentioned that your mother-in-law plays Candy Crush, even though the company does $1 billion a year and the average gamer is in their 30s. Gaming is obviously mainstream. If that's true, and I've asked this question, I think, a dozen times, why does the industry treat gaming as this niche, risky inventory?
I think there's two parts to that question. One is like a perception issue. I think for people who don't come from gaming, they still have that image of gaming as a product that, it's young men is sitting in their basement playing games, right? But yeah, the average gamer is now in their 30s. We all grew up with gaming in some shape or form. I think there has been this popular narrative to say that games is basically, I guess, a hit-driven business is what they'll probably say. And I think games is unique from that point of view where you kind of have it as a business of science and art. And most people still think of it as a pure kind of art form as opposed to the business that it really is. Look, it's not easy. It's not as easy to create a hit game as it is to kind of create a consumer app, right? A consumer app typically serves some other purpose besides entertainment. There's some sort of utility to it. So Bible chat serves a faith demand, right? Alinea serves investing demand. There is some sort of underlying, Maslow's hierarchy of needs that they're serving, which makes it easier to find product market fit. Games are pure entertainment. And so, there's always going to be different themes and different narratives and different gameplay. Like ultimately, can you deliver fun? There's no other motivation for it most of the time. Clever game design helps to layer that motivation. So if, you're playing game because of fun, can I add in social? So it kind of becomes a little bit more sticky. That's basically what game design is trying to do most of the time.
So you're also a fan with free to play with in-app economies, and you said it produces the better long-term monetization. Most consumer apps are still subscription-based. However, why is the subscription model winning if free to play economics are better?
It's harder to do. I mean, look, the path to launching subscription is a lot more straightforward for the developer.
Right.
You're probably going to be able to launch a subscription product, within the first 6 months, right? Or 3 months even. There's lots of infrastructure to help you launch subscriptions, manage your paywalls, do, test monthly versus quarterly versus annual subscriptions. And that's great. It has its place within the consumer app space. And even within gaming itself, right? It has battle passes. That's essentially subscription. That gives kind of the publisher immediate more immediate return on ad spend. That's great validation for the question of, that's great that people are using your app and game. Are they going to pay for it? That's how you know whether you have a business. But implementing in-app purchases, microtransactions essentially requires you to basically launch an economy and then constantly rebalance that economy. From a product development standpoint, that's long-term commitment when you've got short-term revenue pressure.
Right.
You know, you're not going to get it right the first time. Your economy is going to be wrong. That's the only guarantee. You're probably going to need to rebalance it. Your energy system is too permissive. You know, you're not getting enough conversions through the door. You know, your difficulty level balancing is wrong. And so people find it too easy, they churn. They find it too hard, they churn. So, you know, it's a long road to get an in-app economy design correct and correctly balanced so that you can actually monetize. But when you do get that right, you know, your long-term LTV is probably going to be a lot higher than if it was just pure subscriptions. But I guess as a startup founder or an operator, you've got short-term demands, you've got short-term pressures, and then you need to think about the long-term. It's a difficult dance.
So I now want to throw you on a desert island. You have a partner for emotional support, 2 cats, I guess, for rodent control, Donald Trump and JD Vance, 2 people no woman has ever said they wanted on a desert island with them.
Probably
But you
not.
said it's because that way I know the U.S. military is coming to find us. That's the most strategically optimized desert island answer in the history of this show. You're not people that you like. You pick people whose absence would trigger a rescue operation. Can you walk me through that thinking?
I'm going to be honest with you. Like, I struggle with that question a lot. And here's why. I would love to be on I would love to be on a desert island, at least for like, you know, a week or two, have some quiet time. I'd probably bring a book. That's the truth of it. I would probably be happy with my partner and my 2 cats. I'll be honest. But, you know, eventually I'm going to want to get off of that desert island. And I think
your partner's the only person that you chose to be with. Everyone else seems to be functional. Is that romantic or terrifying?
No, I think that's romantic. He's, you know, we've been together for 12 years. If I didn't like him, I probably, you know, we wouldn't be together. So I do enjoy his company. He's my best friend. I trust him more than anybody else. My 2 cats, because, you know, I love them, honestly. And because they'd probably be pretty good at rodents. One of them, I'm not so sure, but the other one, definitely. And, you know, from a point of view of getting out in the most efficient way possible, I don't want to have to slog through like survival. I just want somebody to come and get us.
Also reading people, which I thought was interesting. You said you don't want to do mind reading because that would be exhausting and honestly deeply disappointing. You learn this from market sellers who have 3 seconds to qualify a buyer. Is VC just market selling with bigger numbers?
I think early stage VC has a lot of people reading and trying to understand the person that you're investing in. Now, we specifically invest in pre-seed to Series A. So like in VC speak, very boring. That's pre-product, pre-revenue, right? I mean, I'm literally investing in the person most of the time and banking that they're going to figure it out. And that, you know, we're going to be aligned. They're not going to screw me over. There's not going to be bad behavior. That's basically a lot of what we do at the pre-seed stage. If you're a Series A, B, C growth investor, that's obviously going to look very different to you, like what your skill sets are. So I've found that the best people that can read other people come from non-privileged backgrounds where, you know, if your whole, like, I'll give an example. You know, in my kind of line of work, I suppose we often meet extremely privileged people, and they're extremely nice most of the time. They're extremely well-meaning, but there's also a huge naivety that the world is amazing and people are really nice to you for no reason at all. And the truth is probably that people are nice to you because they want something out of you. Maybe that's very cynical, which maybe I should be a bit sad about. But I think, you know, the best people that I've seen that are best reads of people are people who come from non-privileged backgrounds. And you actually have nothing to offer the other person. You've got to read that person really well. I used to work in retail. That was like one of my first jobs, right? I've worked in retail. I've worked in a call center. And the most impressive salespeople and the most impressive people are the ones who like do this for a living. They're in the markets. You know, early morning, they got to stand there all day long. They have 2 seconds to kind of qualify a customer or user, read them, read their intentions, what matters to them, how do you speak to them. I find that's, you know, extremely, extremely impressive. And at least right now, AI can't really teach you how to do that. Maybe if everybody starts wearing meta glasses, sure. But I think that's a really important people skill that most people lack.
So you brought the president and vice president to a desert island as a rescue SEAL. That's the most Singaporean answer I've ever heard. It's pure pragmatism, zero sentimentality, and maximum outcome. but you also rejected the YOTA concept completely. You said the worst thing you can do is put any single individual on a pedestal. Most individuals are limited and overconfident of their abilities across domains. That sounds like a sharp critique of the entire guru in VC culture, like in one sentence. So do you think the VC industry is too hero worship dependent?
I think startup and the VC ecosystem are generally too hero dependent. Everybody's a fan of the hero narrative. Oh my God, this startup was amazing because this person was amazing. Like, I think a startup is you're in a consistent stage of failure until you actually succeed. Until then, everybody's just failing. And I think it's tempting to put it into a narrative. It's like, oh my God, this single person was incredible. There's that saying, right? You should never meet your heroes. Most people I've met are extremely they might be specialists in their domains, but I think it's probably a little bit cringe when VCs start philosophizing about like, hey, what the war in Ukraine or Strait of Hormuz, like they're experts. We're not experts. We just feel very confident of our intellectual capabilities and domain expertise extending outside of our wheelhouse. So I don't believe in the concept of a Yoda. I think there's something to learn from everybody. A friend of mine, kind of shared this idea of like a personal board of directors with me. And I thought that was great because if I want to go and learn the best B2B sales techniques, I'm going to go ask somebody who's operational in the field and knows that. If I want to go and learn about, negotiating a hostage situation, I'll probably go and learn from somebody about that. But I'm not going to go to one person and expect them to be everything to me. I think that's foolish. And oftentimes we see it all the time with startup founders. You'll have somebody that comes from a corporate background. They were extremely successful. They are very successful and great in their craft, but then they start giving advice to startup founder and you're like, you're not a Fortune 500 company. You cannot therefore operate like a Fortune 500 company. The negotiating balance of power dynamics doesn't work that way for you.
So you've been 9 years in marketing and growth before VC. You launched your luxury leather bags from your boss's living room, and you learned that ROAS and that paid advertising is not a dirty word. Then you saw big institutions treat ad budgets as black holes, where campaigns won awards but had zero ROI. Is the VC career a reaction to the waste you saw in marketing?
I believe so, yes. I think that is the case. I mean, that's on one level. Like you had the Ubers of the world, right? Like it was just subsidizing user acquisition that would never become profitable with VC dollars. And I think the knee-jerk reaction was to say paid user acquisition is bad. I don't think paid user acquisition is bad. I think unprofitable paid user acquisition is bad. But if you kind of have the discipline on your cohorts and what you're running on the user acquisition side, it can be a powerful vehicle for growth for a company. So, yeah.
So you're also the number one employee at Play Ventures. You joined before anyone else. You helped build a VC fund from scratch. That's a founder's experience inside a fund. What did being the employee number one teach you that later hire?
I think being an employee at Play, first of all, as a small fund, we're still 12 people. We're not a mega fund. We don't have hundreds and hundreds of employees. And I always say that I think the value of being at the ground floor of such a fund is that you get to be involved in everything. And I think that's been incredibly valuable for me in understanding LP dynamics, who we're fundraising from, fund construction, portfolio construction, and how we want to operate as a fund. I think for most other people, there's value to going to a larger fund for sure. There's probably a lot more guardrails. There's probably a clearer onboarding and teaching you kind of from a handheld basis. But I think, I get to have my fingers in a lot of different pies and be exposed as much as I want or as little as I want. So I really enjoyed that, coming in at the ground floor, learning as we go. Our first fund was 40 million, which I think in today's terms, many people will call it maybe a micro fund.
Right.
But it was a great size, I think, for a first fund. There is also I think value in having smaller funds, just from a returns perspective. The bigger your fund grows, the harder it is to return. So, before we were maybe able to invest in opportunities that maybe had a smaller exit potential in terms of what the size would be, sub $1 billion exit. Today, we don't really have that option. We run a $150 million size fund. I'm looking for $1 billion outcomes in order for it to make sense. So that does then end up limiting what you can invest in or should invest in.
So rapid fire, Whatever comes to your mind first. The best game in the world right now.
I always go back to Civilization. I love that game
Sid
for
Meier.
the reason. Yes,
Yeah,
but
I'm
for
an
that
old
reason,
school gamer. I remember Civilization. Wow.
yes, but for that reason also, I cannot have it on my devices. I will sit there and just not do anything else. I won't go out to eat. It's like one more turn. Right now on my mobile, I'm playing a game called Cozy Florist. It's essentially like Farmville, but for floristry. So you have your little floral nursery, you fulfill orders. It's relaxing for me. I love floristry in general as my real hobby, but that's expensive. And my cats tend to eat flowers that they shouldn't. So I don't do it as much.
Most overrated thing in ad tech.
Most overrated thing in ad tech. I think it would probably be a lot of the conversation that's going around about kind of agentic commerce within the ChatGPT ecosystem. I think, a lot, I think people make a lot of fuss about it and like they launched it and it didn't work out. But I think, the path to figuring out is never going to be straightforward. I'm not really surprised that they took it down. I think they just need to go back to the drawing board on that one. So I think when people read into this as like they failed, I think that's an overreaction.
Most underrated?
Most underrated? Somebody building a consumer agent as the building block for the next advertising layer. I think nobody's talking about it, and I think they should all be looking at that.
If you could have invested in any company in the history of gaming, which one would it have been?
Oh, that's a tough one. I mean, I would still say probably King. It's an old, obviously franchise. There's a lot of, I think, challenges ahead with that company. But, they started off, they had Candy Crush, they've made multiple franchises.
Right.
It doesn't, it's not heavy on the live ops necessarily. They do have I think 3,000 levels now. It still makes a huge amount of money every year. I think over about $1 billion a year. So, it's a great business.
Trump and Vance on Desert Island, which one is more annoying by day 3?
That's a good question. I'm going to say Vance. Please come talk to me. I want to talk about it. I want to see how we can get this going, both as a consumer and as an investor. I would love to see this happen.
Phylicia, thank you. You're the most unapologetic, honest VC I have ever had on this show. You said privacy is a lie. Anthropic is lying about ads. You brought Trump and Vance to a desert island as a rescue signal. You gamify prayer, marriage, and financial literacy, and you have the most detailed vision of agent-to-agent advertising I've ever heard from anyone, including the people building it. I'm Phylicia Koh, and this has been the ADOTAT Show. Show me an incentive, and I will show you the outcome. See you next time.
Thank you.
That's the show. Phylicia Koh, general partner at Play Ventures. She told me privacy is a lie. Anthropic is lying about ads. And the entire Agentic advertising stack forgot to build a seat for you. She's right about the seat. Thanks to our sponsors. Troutman Amin LLP, the firm you call when the TCPA letter has already arrived. And Incremental.com, who measure whether your advertising actually caused anything. Neither of them had any say in what you just heard. The written version is up now at ADOTAT.com. Part 1 is free. Part 2 is where I checked her math. I'm Pesach Latin. Show me the incentive, and I'll show you the outcome. See you next time.
Season 9, baby, let's go.